Mick Gooden runs Old Man Creek Bull Farm near Wagga Wagga in New South Wales and is president of farmer group Vic No Till. In this episode, we chat about the value of having a supportive group of peers around you, the links between soil health and human health, the importance of pulling up and taking time for observation and reflection, transitioning cropping systems profitably, leveraging the power of working with nature, and how to communicate the opportunity in agriculture as a solution to many of our biggest challenges. How's things looking in your part of the world at the moment?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting this last fortnight or so. It's just another way it shows how the season can change. In context, like certainly we're far better off than those guys in South Australia and the Western District, which we had a reasonable spring last year. Our rolling average rainfall, our long-term average is 430 mils, and at the moment we're about 320. So we're certainly well below it. But we've had 50 mils in the last fortnight, and that's really turned our season around. We had a pretty hot, dry, almost late-ish summer, but summer was almost into autumn. Really unusual, like high soil temperatures. Last week it was still 13 degrees. So yeah, as we speak, I just have to say our season's sort of turned around, which is really great. It was a bit timely for us.
So, Mick, you wear lots of different hats at this point in your life.
Yeah.
Do you want to just tell me a little bit about the different hats you wear and how that came to be?
Yeah, well, I suppose first and foremost, our family's got a property 70 k's west of Wagga, Willowlee, which is a family place. And my wife and I sort of took over that. Well, I took over that in about 2008, and then, been running that since then. That was part of a larger family business. I got into holistic management 2011. That's when the 8 families started off.
Just explain a little bit about the 8 families as well. And I can't resist plugging the case study that we did of Willowlee, which goes into quite a bit of detail on your story. But yeah, tell me a bit about the 8 families.
Yeah, well, basically it's just it's a management group. The main thing we all got in common is we had done holistic management training with Bruce Ward, and his big advice was, if you guys to succeed in this, you need to get a support network of like-minded people around you. And we're really privileged that group of people, like we work hard at it, but it's just clicked. And looking back on it now, we're just really close mentors and friends with each other, but also to have each other's best interests at heart and offer really sound business advice too within the group. It's this really lovely mixture of, deep friendships and love and respect for each other, but also having the courage to call someone out and say, look, is that going to be the best business decision or life decision? So, we've got this really sweet spot now. And I think the reason why the group works so well is we've got a really great range of experiences in there. And Michael Anna Coggan and Jill Taylor, early 90s, early days, and then right through to Beck Gorman, who came reasonably late, but we still get this mixture of 20, 30 years of experience and everyone else along the way. And we're all doing, whilst we're following the holistic management principles and the grazing for profit principles, we're all doing things quite differently. There's quite different business approaches and different areas of interest in there. And that's probably fueled some of my other interests in terms of, I had a really great example from my father. He was a very much community-minded person. And that sort of concept of if you give, you receive, and always having that sort of community-minded. So I was involved with the local land care group and a few things like that, and then that morphed into being on one of the stopper boards in the early 2011-12 through that period, Holbrook Land Care Board, and then more recently onto the Vic No Till board in about 2018-19, and then you hang around on these places for a little while and you end up further up the line. And then also I've done a stint on the holistic management co-op as well. All those things, I really feel like they all feed off each other. We're really all trying to head in the same direction, whether that's on our farm, with Vic No Till, with the holistic management co-op, and within 8 families. We're all actually trying to make the world a better place. Just all these got these little different parts that are heading in the same direction.
I think you probably sell yourself a little bit short in saying that if you just hang around long enough. I mean, I'm sure you bring a lot, and you've recently been appointed as the president of Vic No Till, which I think is a great thing for that organisation. Just coming back to the 8 families group, we've been, in recognition of the fact that a lot of the case study farmers that we profiled have been part of groups like that, and that's often been quite foundational to their success, their ability to sustain that practice change and that different way of doing things in the face of a lot of barriers or forces that are pushing them back in the other direction. In thinking about that and trying to think, well, how can we as an organisation support more of that happening? It's not always easy to have a group form and build those bonds that make it an effective, functional management group, as you describe it. Like, how did that happen? Was it organic? What made it work?
I think we worked at it, in all honesty. You could say we got lucky a little bit with the characters that are in the group, the diversity and the people that are in there. There's some pretty motivated and special people in the group, but that probably could happen in any other group too in a lot of ways. I think we probably about 3 or 4 years in, I remember Cogs at one of the meetings was like, we're stagnating, this is turning into cups of tea and chit chat. And we actually, I remember we got Brian Wilbur came in and we redid our context, and now we read that out at the start of every meeting, and we actually really put some structure back into it. And that's not to say that we don't have a chinwag and a great time. Subtly, it is a bit of a morning tea competition in a lot of ways, but there's actually we do knuckle down and get to business. We have an agenda with each meeting. Everyone's got an equal opportunity in that group to contribute, and everyone does in their own various ways. And I think that's one of the unique things, that there's the various skills of the individuals there, and everyone's contributing from their own perspective and skill set, and that just melds together really well.
Yeah.
So I think we're really lucky like that, and certainly with the work that I'm doing with Vic No Till, that's one of our big ambitions now, is to create the conditions to have more of these groups to function, because I've felt firsthand the experience of that peer-to-peer learning and doing that well. And so I think, if you are really to make that meaningful change, and I think you've got to be really careful, like there's a few other groups that have sort of started and stopped, or started and maybe not going to the depths that we feel like we are within the 8 families. And we've been quite strategic about the size of the group. So in layman's terms, we all want to be able to sit around the dining room table. So you don't want 30 people there, you want 10 to 15. When we get together, like a Christmas party, if we have 20 odd people there, that's it, there's no more. One of the real lovely things now is we've got that genuine second generation coming into the meetings, which is really, really lovely, and it's going to be interesting to see how big it actually grows. At some point in time, we're going to have to say, look, are you first generation or second generation, or how big's the table going to get? But I think that group size is really important, and also it's a priority. Like if we've got an 8 families meeting on and something else pops up, 9 times out of 10 that something else gets bumped. Like it's we put it in our diary, we're planning sort of 6 to 12 weeks ahead for the next couple of meetings coming up.
And is that something that just evolved? You just happen to have the people in the room who made that a priority, who committed? Well,
I think it goes both ways. We've got the same amount of time as everyone, but when something that you go to, you get a lot of energy and effort out of it and a reward and benefit, then you're going to prioritise that. And that's where I think that sort of line in the sand that had occurred a few years ago, it was like, well, if we keep heading down this path, people stop dropping off to the meetings and then it just fizzles away, where we drew the line in the sand and said, right, we're committing to this, and this is a really important part of our lives and our businesses. And so we ramped it up, and it's an important date in our diary. Every business really makes a solid effort to get someone at each meeting, and that has that continuity. And also we allow time and space for everyone to contribute in the meetings with their own sort of ideas and thoughts, input, which I think is really, really important. And so, it becomes a priority because you actually get a lot out of it. And the other things, it's just awesome to see. Like, we've got a bit of a WhatsApp. Regularly, there's other deals going on within the group in the background and all that all the time. So it's funny. Often at the meetings, most people have been catching up on their own between, in their own various ways. And usually when there's an event on, like Jill's really connected with lots of different things, and we'll say, well, you report back on that. Like, I know Jill went to the Wagga conference in WA recently, and it was like, well, we want to hear about that. Like, no one else was going to it, but she'll report back to the group, and in her own edited and succinct way will be really great information, knowing what we're going to be interested in and what the sort of key takeaways are.
Yeah, I mean, you've got 8 brains out there scouring the planet for information that will be of interest to the group rather than one.
Yeah, and in all honesty, it gets back to the cliche of the whole's greater than the sum of the parts. So we just share that information, bring it all together, and it's all for the greater good. There's a genuine abundance mindset within the group. Everyone's here working together. It's not this scarcity or competition. So everyone's all trying to help each other out.
Brilliant. This will be the last plug, but I will also plug the fact that we have done a case study on that 8 families group as well, because it was such a good example of an effective and functional group that's supporting multiple families to go in this direction. So people can check that out on our website as well. I want to get to Vic No Till, but before I do, just a little bit about Willowlee and where are things at with that part of your life, and where are things going?
Yeah, well, that's our farm, and the reality is it's not the full-time part of my life because of the scale of the operation. So we own 380 hectares, and then we lease another 240, so it's about 600 odd hectares. From a labour efficiency perspective, I should really only be on the farm about 10 to 12 hours a week. So in my mind, then I necessarily need to be working off farm for another 40 or so. So that's what probably allows me to go and do some of these other things. Our main focus on the farm, we run a cattle stud, Angus cattle stud, and that's come about from observing how animals are grazed once you put them in the sort of cell grazing conditions, and some animals perform really well under those conditions and other animals don't. And I was observant of that. When we first got into it, we started trading animals, and some animals would do really well and others wouldn't, and you'd have all these different things, and really wondering. And then I was exposed to Kit Farrow in 2015 when Terry McCosker and Graham Rees brought him out, and heard what he had to say, and I was really interested in his genetics, and then that culminated in me going over to the US in January 2017 and doing a few of these bull work days there. And then, subsequently we sort of formed a partnership. There was a company up at Glen Innes that started a year before, and then we joined forces for a couple of years with Kit, and then that dissolved, and we're still using some of Kit's genetics and our own, and we've imported some genetics from New Zealand as well. But really we're ultimately focusing on breeding an animal that can be raised on grass, 100% on grass, and high-end, really good eating experience. But the similarities and correlations between an animal that's like maternally efficient and really tasty are really great. And I think there's a real gap in that market at the moment, this whole emissions piece and all this, without trying to open up a whole can of worms. What we're trying to do and what's going to be really good for the land is actually really good from land ecosystem management, animal management, and also human health. So all these things just fall into place. Yeah. It's really another real example of when you start working with nature, things tend to flow and fall into the line. And I feel like modern animal, modern breed society, and probably modern land management, we're fight against the whole time. So we're actually heading almost in the opposite direction in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I'm hearing more and more about researchers who are starting to better understand and document those linkages between human health and animal health and plant health and ecosystem health, and putting some data and evidence behind that principle of everything's connected, and what's good for the planet is good for us.
Yeah, the line that really stuck with me was Stacey Curcio at the 2024 Vic No Till conference, and she said, "You are what you eat eats," and that was the sort of, because you are what you eat. We've heard that before, but then it's like we're watching what your cow eats out in the paddock. If that's not good quality grass, well then that's going to be translated. And also from a crop nutrition perspective, if you're feeding your crop crap, well then it's hard to think that the produce that's coming from it is going to be healthy as well.
We've got such a long way to go in the conversation about human health and diets and nutrition when you think about it from that perspective, because there really isn't yet a conversation about, well, how was the food that you're eating produced, except to the extent of organics. That's got its niche. But other than that, the conversation is all about, are you getting enough vegetables? Are you getting enough fruit? Really not thinking about the production process and whether that food was grown in healthy soil with good microbial populations that we know are the ultimate reason for getting all of those essential micronutrients into the food that we're eating.
Yeah, I really do think we're on the cusp of some of this, the technology, like you think the Bionutrient Association with Dan Kittredge and that type of work. Like it astounds me really that he's screaming out for cash to be funded to do this research when you think of the billions that goes into pharmaceutical research and all this type of thing. There's no doubt that you'd like to think there's enough evidence around to support the food as your medicine aspect. And when you think about it in the big picture, that if you fix agriculture up properly, ag soils, then you fix up the food system and then you fix the health system. Like the synergies there, it almost sounds too simple in a lot of ways, but genuinely you can see that. I was only looking last night through some of the program at Groundswell, and there's some really great themes coming through there in terms of they're looking at the soil, they're looking at the consumer, they're looking at the farmer, all that flow right through. And I think we're really closer to get some really tangible outcomes in this space than we think, which is really exciting.
Yeah, there's an interesting quote. I've just been spending a little bit of time with Alejandro Carrillo, the Mexican rancher, who said, regenerative grazing is actually very simple. The hardest thing is keeping it simple. And I think that goes for so many things. You know, we don't want to think that things are actually simple. In some ways, things are very complex and complicated, but having those simple principles and trusting that some of those simple principles play out in the very complicated reality of the world can really help us wrap our heads around these things.
I remember when I first got into the holistic management, and I was in a pretty tough space personally, and Bruce Ward pulled me up. He was down on the farm at the time, and he pulled me up and he said, just slow down, just take a breath and pull up, and it's okay to stop and observe things. And my father was a really hard worker, very successful farmer in a lot of ways, but he set a pretty high standard in terms of work ethic, and, you know, more was better. And I was ingrained with that. And it is true to a certain extent. There's times when you really do have to hustle, but I'd been doing that for 10 or 15 years, almost without drawing breath. And, you know, difficult situation financially and emotionally in that, and having someone to say, look, you've got to pull up for a bit, otherwise it won't end well. And now I actually just savour going out to the paddock. It's the most enjoyable thing to do. I was out there yesterday afternoon, and just spending time, might be 10, 15 minutes, just walking out, looking at the cattle, looking at the pastures, observing what's going on. Yeah, being in touch with your landscape like that, I think it's really important. It's so enjoyable, and also it's actually really, especially a time like at the moment, it's really informative for me to get on my hands and knees, dig a hole, see what's going on, see what grasses are growing, which ones aren't, is clover nodulating, are the cattle happy, are they full, what's their dung score, all this information is coming at you. And I'd much prefer receive that sort of first-hand analogue than rely on a sensor or a data or something and get a report come in an email at 7 o'clock in the evening to say, oh, this is how the farm's tracking. And I think spending 15 minutes like that, especially knowing in my context at the moment I'm going to be away for 7 weeks, in a couple of days' time, really get reset and in touch with what's going on, really important.
And I wonder if part of the reason that people struggle to do that is because it's enjoyable and it feels indulgent somehow, or, you know, I wonder what the hardworking dad would have thought of that. And it reminds me, like Alejandro mentioned an anecdote about his father sitting on a chair in a paddock looking at the cows, and he said to him, Dad, what are you doing? And his dad said, I'm making money.
Yeah. I think that taking that time to stop and reflect is really important. And for me, some of the best ideas or thoughts or breakthroughs have happened when you just pull up for a while and just let all the noise sort of dissipate and get in contact with what you're trying to do, and then all of a sudden, whack, something will slap you in the back of the head. And that's what, whether you needed it or not, it's come to you at that time. And so I think opening yourself up for those opportunities is really important.
Yeah, there's another good quote. If I had 12 hours to cut down a tree, I'd spend the first 11 hours sharpening my axe. And my wife often reminds me of this when I'm working like a madman, trying to get everything done. Sharpen your axe. And, you know, there's never going to be an end to the work. There's always going to be something else you could throw yourself into. But working smarter, not necessarily working harder, is often, as you say, when the breakthroughs come through.
Yeah, no, exactly right. No, it's important. It's an important thing to do. And I think that's one of the things that is really great in this space. We are buying ourselves time with the way that we're managing our farms. I'm in my mid-40s, and I genuinely do feel like I've got time on the farm, time with my family. You probably always want more in some ways. And then also, more importantly in a lot of ways for me, is time to donate time to some of these other organisations.
So let's come to Vic No Till. As I understand, Vic No Till started as a cropping group that was trying to support the adoption of no-till across the cropping industry in Victoria. As a grazier, like, how do you come to be the president of a cropping organisation?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting that I did make a joke when I was elected the president of Vic No Till and I was a New South Wales cattleman. At the time, it might be 12 months and we'll have a name change and a focus change. But I suppose the thing that really attracted me to the Vic No Till group was the tagline, Farmers Helping Farmers. That really resonated with me. But I think the first function I went to was one they had in Shepparton with Gabe Brown. I was thinking, well, this is getting off to a pretty cool start. And we went out, Gabe was presenting there, and had a bit of a yarn with him, and we went out to Fraser Pogue's farm and like in the dirt, seeing what's going on. And Fraser was probably what I would have thought 10 years ahead of where a lot of guys were in terms of really high production, but doing it in a way, looking at improving your soil as well as producing high quality product. So that was really great introduction. And then they're just a really good bunch of people who are sharing knowledge, similar to the 8 Family Group in terms of no ego, abundance mindset, wanting to make the world a better place. And so that really resonated with me. And I suppose the thing that I felt like, how could I contribute to this group? There was a really big lack of knowledge in that grazing management livestock space. And so I felt like I had some of those skills and I'd be able to contribute, probably hold a bit accountable about if you really want to take these systems to the next level, we're probably going to need livestock to be integrated in that system. And then I was in a privileged position with some of the work I've been doing at RCS, that business management, business acumen, as well as the grazing management, put those things together. Growing up, we were on a mixed farm. I've spent my time driving headers and tractors and all that type of thing. And there's an element of that I enjoy, but it's not. I certainly don't get out of bed now and wish that I was jumping on a tractor for the next 12 hours. I've got an appreciation for it, and I see, the land management chain that's occurred in the last 20 or 30 years. There's a massive amount more cropping that goes on now than there used to be, and so it's really important if we genuinely want to make large-scale change in our part of the world that we get the cropping practices to allow that land improvement to occur. So this is a bit of a mechanism that I felt like I could contribute in that space.
And I guess reintegration or integration of livestock potentially being an important part of that. I mean, we were just talking about parts of the world where perhaps they don't have much livestock or don't think they need much livestock, and there potentially being an upper ceiling to how far you can take soil health in that context.
Well, there's a graph that I know they definitely show it in the Grazing and Farming for Profit course, and I've seen Gabe Brown present it himself, but he was tracking along soil carbon levels, bumping along for about 8 or 10 years at 2 to 3%, and then when he introduced livestock, it just took off up to about 8 or 10. And so and it makes a lot of sense in terms of the biology that's in the gut of the rumen. That's your mobile, we'll paraphrase Joel Salader, but it's that mobile digestive reaction unit sort of thing, how he says it, that is moving around. That's creating the humidity that's required in especially in those dry times that the bacteria and fungi are going to need to then repopulate what's going on in the soil. So it's that interaction between above ground and below ground livestock is really important.
Yeah, and I think for myself as someone who lives in the city and whose social circles are mostly amongst people in the city, with the very strong push towards plant-based diets for health reasons, which that's a whole other kettle of fish. But with that, I think a lot of people in the city don't quite understand that there really aren't any natural ecosystems that don't have animals in them.
No, certainly not in brittle environments. In that brittle environment, you basically do need the cow or the herbivore to make use of the biomass that's produced, and it's actually far more effective to put that biomass through a ruminant than it is through anything else. So there's real synergy there. And I think probably also too, the other part why I argue for the livestock part of it is just the enterprise risk and skill set management. If you're you're 100% cropping, and like it was experienced last year, when there was a big thumping frost that came through and all of a sudden there's 50% of your yield gone. Well, if you've got a livestock in the system, you've already taken a lot of those direct costs off the table through grazing income throughout the year, or potentially an ability to capture that grazing income through eating the stubbles at the back end after harvest. So it's a risk management tool as well. And that doesn't necessarily mean every cropping guy's got to have 1,000 cows running around. There's heaps of different models to have livestock. And livestock doesn't mean necessarily livestock ownership. There's joint ventures or whatever that could occur. It's about that nutrient cycling and creating a win-win opportunity between the different enterprises, the grain production enterprise and also the livestock enterprise.
Yeah. So we've, Soils for Life and Vic No Till have been in a partnership over the last couple of years working on a Future Drought Fund funded project around cropping systems and soil health and drought resilience. And I said I wasn't going to plug anything anymore, but I lied. We're well on the way to publishing 10 guides to a whole range of different practices that can build soil health and drought resilience in cropping systems. One of those is integrating livestock, which should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, a lot of the material for those guides has been drawn from case studies of farmers who are Vic No Till members, and it's been an amazing partnership. I'd be interested to know what you're seeing changing amongst Vic No Till's cropping members, and how do you think that's reflecting changes that are happening more widely across the cropping industry?
What we're learning now is that it becomes a transition piece. So you've got to respect where a lot of these systems are. And if you think about, for want of a better word, a conventional cropping system now, you're anywhere between sort of 60 and 100 kilos of starter fertiliser, probably MAP, and then the rates that get thrown around between 2 and 400 kilos of urea. And in some instances that's nitrogen, so that amount's doubled. And herbicides and fungicides to boot to sort of prop up that system all the way through. So if you're coming out of that system and then wanting to go to a system where we heard glimpses to go into some of our sort of more advanced members that are significantly reducing their herbicide and fertiliser requirements and use, it's taken those guys 10, 15 years to get to that. So you can't just go on to a fellow's place and I recently did a podcast with Brendan Patterson, and like he's 10 or 15 years ahead of where a lot of these like potentially new members are. So to have a field day at their place and say, oh look, just go and do this, like it really does take time. And like Pato's father was pretty innovative. He was one of the early adopters of a disc machine and all that. So you're probably coming through sort of generations of people at that cutting edge. So I think we really got to respect where people are coming from, give them those tools to make those transitions. And that's where this sort of support group network becomes really important, and actually getting it back to those really local contexts and conditions. Even with on farms, you've got different soil types, and some of those soil pit days that we've had over the last couple of years have been really beneficial. There's nothing sort of pull your pants down type of moment when you go and dig a soil pit on your farm, because they just don't lie. And every farm's got constraints and probably good things and bad things that are showing up in a soil pit like that. So getting to understand that has been really important, and then how you deal with those constraints. I think the big difference that Vic No Till is trying to do in this space is, rather than the recommendation be, 2.5 tonne of lime or more, and throw some gypsum while you're there, it's like, well, maybe put some of that out, but also put some biology with it and let the biology really amplify some of those inputs. Like, the inputs are still really important, and you're dealing with chemistry, physics and biology all the time, but let's also respect that we need the biology there, and it's a really important role to play. I think
you mentioned the transition piece, and I reflect on the evolution of Soils for Life, and there's been a similar thing to what you're describing. When we were established, our mission was raise awareness that soil is important, not just when it becomes a problem like salinity or erosion. Soil is an important thing, and that paying attention to soil, taking a regenerative approach to farming practices can have some pretty amazing results. But when we were first doing that, we were finding the stories of the people who were 10, 20, 30 years down the road, and they had an amazing story to tell, and it was very inspiring, and a lot of people got very inspired, and that's what we needed at that time. But I think it's a very different thing, and especially once you come to cropping, it's a very different thing to actually how do you transition. And a lot of those people did transition in a pretty painful way. A crash followed by slow, painful rebuilding with lots of mistakes along the way and lots of learnings. I think it was Alejandro again called it the misery years for him. And I think where we are at now, where we do have many more farmers interested in how they can improve soil health on their property and what that can mean for their lives and for their businesses and their productivity and profitability, they're not going to jump off a cliff. They're not going to go cold turkey, and they shouldn't. And it is about, well, how can we make that transition less painful or not painful at all? Profitable from day one, John Kempf often says. Like, how can you choose the first practice that's going to be profitable from day one, and then you build on that, you earn the right to wean yourself off some of those other things and change the system and build the biology so that you can replace some of what was being provided by those inputs with the fertility and the pest control and all of the other great things that healthy functioning biology can do.
Yeah, you've got to, and I'm stealing this from John Kempf. I've just heard it in a recent podcast, that you got to build the biological system as you wean yourself off the chemical system. That's so true, so important, and that's something that I think we underestimate it. And also how contextual that is. What you do at Mara is different to what you do at Rutherglen, to what you do at Swan Hill, to what you do at Horsham. So all the way through, they're all very different spots. That doesn't mean it can't be done, but the steps that you're going to take along the way are going to be different. I think going back to like the soil health principles type of thing, they still remain no matter where you are, but it's about how you adapt them and probably which lever you pull first. I think one of the other things that's probably really changed in reality is that our farm debt has gone up significantly, and that's a sort of a threat and opportunity. People are hurting and the businesses aren't as profitable as they once were. So is that because the existing system isn't working as well, or is it because getting a return on investment is harder and harder? So it's going to be a difficult spot in terms of people need to probably make change or want to make changes, but then what level of risk are they prepared to take? Unfortunately for us, we often get the comment, new guy comes to a field day and says, oh, look, I'd love to make some changes, but an agronomist tells me if I stop, reduce my MAP or urea rates, I'm going to go broke. And so that's a pretty hard argument to come against, and especially when there has been guys who have had financial losses because of not going about that the right way. So it's about coming up with the systems approach that will allow you to transition and start improving the quality of the soil that you're growing the crops in, improving the quality of life that you've got when you're managing that land, and also improving the quality of the product coming off it. And I think the people who I've seen who have done things well, it's a really different mindset. You're quite curious for knowledge and asking really good questions and being curious about what's going on, asking why type of thing, rather than just being handed the reco and it's like, oh, righto, I'm a spray rig operator, I just go and apply this and this. And for some people that's fine, that if that's what they want to do, that's awesome, go and do it. But I think there's another level of curiosity and as a land steward type of thing that you want to be improving it. And we're all really seeing it now, like putting on lime. If you had to put on lime like 20 years ago for the first time, and then that was 10 years, and now it's 5 years, and it's like, well, where's it going to be? Like, where are you going to draw the line? Let's reset the system and say, well, putting on some lime and deep ripping some country might be a really great thing to reset the system, but let's not plan on having to come back in 5 years or 10 years' time and do that again. What systems and what steps can we take? You might correct some deficiencies in there, but then not have to come back and do that again.
Well, and I guess why are those deficiencies there, and being curious about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence around to support what's causing some of that stuff. Like the sort of throwaway line is, production agriculture is an acidifying process. I don't necessarily buy that once you get the biological systems in place. Certainly the high rates of synthetic inputs, you will. That is exactly what happened, and we've proven that time and time again. Certainly from our own grazing management perspective, we've had pHs increasing without a lime application as such, which on chemistry on paper is impossible, but that's what the evidence is showing us. So it can happen there, but you need to build the system and allow that to take place. I think one of the stigmas being called Vic No Till, it's like, if you pull out the deep rippers, you're sort of kicked out of the club, and that's certainly not the case. It's about identifying what your limitation is at the time now, and if intervention is required, and that's happening this year at the upcoming conference. We're going to David Cook's place there, and he's had to go in and rip up some country and apply a heap of lime. His ambition with that is to reset that country and get it back to a state, and from here on in manage it in a way that he isn't going to have to be back there in 5 or 10 years' time.
Yeah. So that conference is coming up in September, right? What are you excited about? We've talked a lot about some of the challenges that people face in transitioning and shifting practices, but what are you excited about? What do you see on the horizon that excites you in Australian agriculture?
Yeah, well, it really is an exciting time. Like, you think the big headwinds that we've got from a global perspective in terms of ecosystem loss or biodiversity loss, loss of ecosystem function, the water cycle, human health issues, like agriculture is going to play a real pivotal role, a sort of climate emission piece. Like agriculture is really one of the only credible solutions to fix a lot of those issues. So I think we've got to play a really pivotal role in that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of headwinds coming against it, but I think we just got to knuckle down and chip away at some of these solutions. I think what gives me real hope is that knowing that we're working with Mother Nature and ultimately the house will win. The humans need the earth doesn't need us. So if we're going to survive on here, we're going to have to work with the resources that we've got. And we've done a pretty good job in the last 50 years of showing, well, if you put a fight up, this is some of the outcomes that are going to occur. And that hasn't been great in terms of, you look at what's happening in the landscape, dust storms, mental health crisis, huge farm debt issues. So you couple all those three things together and it's like, well, that wasn't a great outcome. Now it's probably a great opportunity to look at changing some of the things we do. And I really see a huge opportunity in this space. Some of the actual specific things, I think we're on the cusp of testing and measuring for quality of food, like nutrient density thing. I really think that is going to be a big game changer, because ultimately the old mantle of yield, like more is better, will potentially be trumped by quality is better. And I think that's really going to change our attitude towards production. We're not, solely focused on filling up the B double and sending it off to town and hoping it goes H2 type of thing. It'll be, what are the macro and micronutrients in that load of grain? And also swinging back around to the consumer and understanding what's in that product. So back to that comment about you are what you eat. So if we can actually put some data around the metrics of the quality of produce, then it can really start fueling these whole systems. I think building the soil health from the ground up, and also the farmer then puts themselves in the position where they're rewarded for that. So it's not just tons out the gate, full stop. It's about quality and of produce. Quantity is still going to be important, but it actually becomes quality. And I think the flow-on benefits from that to the consumer it'll really help fuel that. We won't necessarily be a commodity, it'll be actually we're producing food.
And I certainly think that's really the only thing that will get the vast majority of our population that lives in the city interested in agriculture and how food's grown, is the health implications. And that gives me a lot of hope as well. I guess the other thing that gives me a lot of hope is just seeing the on-the-ground evidence that even though we've been fighting this battle with nature for so long, actually nature's incredibly resilient. And when you do start to shift these practices, it bounces back very quickly. Very quickly, maybe 5 years or maybe 10 years or it may be longer, but it's pretty amazing to see the seed bank that's been sitting there dormant for 50, 100, 200 years, popping back up and providing the plants that the landscape needs to recover and regenerate.
Yeah, it is. It is amazing like that. And I think in the cropping space, there's so much improvement. Like little changes make a huge difference in a short period of time. And you think, if you just improve your water infiltration a small amount, that makes a huge difference. Then that really directly does translate back through to not only better crop health and crop performance, and couple that with some nutrient density, just becomes so important.
Coming back to cropping, what's your vision for the future of cropping? How do you see the cropping landscape in Australia evolving? Where do you hope we can get to?
I honestly probably can't take my grazier's head off in this situation, and I genuinely don't understand why we've got such a large cropping area. Like when you think about a lot of our grain that we produce goes to feed either a monogastric or a ruminant. I really love the saying Alan Savory says that a cow was meant to eat grain or it'd have a beak. And so I can see some point in feeding chooks and pigs. Like I love bacon as much as anyone, so there's an element of that's probably not a bad way to use it. But when you think about the co-benefits, if you had all those cattle that are locked up on feed out in the well-managed grazing land, the benefit from an ecological perspective would be massive. So I honestly think, my vision, I hate to say it, but I really think 20, 30, 50 years' time, we won't have as much cropping as we do at the moment. And I think that's going to come from three fronts. I think it's going to come from, one, from an ecological perspective. I think we're fighting nature too much to really genuinely grow large-scale broadacre crops. I think the consumer is going to want to they'll be more conscious about where their food's coming from. And if you're eating an animal that's been locked up in a feedlot for 150 days, one, I don't think that's right for the animal, and I think the social licence will deteriorate on that. And also the other big thing, which is going to be really hard to fight, is the emission part of it. You're doing a practice that's completely bucking the trend with this emission profile, where the evidence is in, and that's how the world evolved over millions of years, was the cows that out on the rangeland eating the grass. And that little cycle in itself it's a carbon sequestration hub where a few tweaks here and there, the best you can do is probably maybe get it to neutral at best.
In an industrial
feedlot
system.
Yeah, in a feedlot system. So a few fancy feed additives and a few genetics here and there, you might tweak the edges, but you're really not going to get that system back in balance. And when you think about the macro level, Like, we need to go negative big time to pull in the excess, and if we're going to fly over to groundswell every so often or go to the States or whatever like that, the world's not going to stop in that light. So those industries cannot reduce some of their emissions. There'll be a bit of technology come in and reduce some things around the edges, but ag's really the main game in terms of where we've got the opportunities to really draw down. If you look at that Paul Hawkins book, ag's in his top 10 best practices, 7 of them are agriculture related, and you could arguably bundle them all in together and call it one, and it's 10 times better than the next best opportunity. Yeah. So we're the main game when it comes to that, which I think as a farmer we've really got to herald that and be a bit more parochial. My city cousins as such will ask them better questions about why do you think that the cow's damaging. And a lot of that time it's very shallow. I saw on YouTube somewhere that the cows are ruining the planet. It's like, well, what conditions was that cow run under? It's that whole analogy. It's not the cow, it's the how, and just challenge people back on that a little bit. And I think that's where our role in Vic No Till is so important. Is we're not only are we land managers, farmers, but we're consumers as well. So we need to get that out more, that we're the opportunity and not the issue. And so it's giving our members the confidence to have those better conversations with people they come in contact with.
Yeah.
And sort of more so, coming back to the theme of this year's conference, is it's about making sure that we've got those fundamentals right, that we are running good, profitable businesses and people are in the right frame of mind to make good decisions. And then that then flows on not only to their land, but then into their community as well.
Well, I think that is a brilliant place to end. So thanks, Mick. It's been great having you on the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Source for Life podcast. If you're enjoying the pod and like this episode, I have a small request. Share this episode with 3 other people so we can grow the community. Check out the show notes to find out more about Mick and Vic No Till and the resources and people mentioned in this episode. Thanks for listening.